going.
Alana, I do say it says live on.
Yeah, it says live, right?
Yeah, it says recording. I think you're good.
Yeah, and it looks like it'd be going. Yeah.
Alana, I do say it says live on.
Yeah, it says. Oh wow. Okay, my audio is on. Got it. Okay. Okay, then I think you can just start when you're ready.
Great. Okay, so we're going to call to order the meeting of the Village of New Paltz Planning Board for June 2nd, 2020. We do not have any applications on our agenda. We do have some public comments, I believe, that have been received. Do we get any more since the ones that were posted?
No. Mm-mm.
Okay, so there are 3 public comments. They're all about Pencil Hill, which maybe I'll get back to later on, these public comments, because I think they're going to go with one of the items on the agenda. So I just wanted to let people know what was going on here. I called the meeting, even though we didn't have any applications, because I wanted to let people know that I was going to be resigning as chair of the planning board, and first kind of debrief the board and the community on matters relating to the planning board that I've been involved in as the chair, conversations that I've had that the board needs to know about to carry on without me being the chair. I wanted to go through all of those because explaining all of those will also help me to explain after that why I am recusing myself as a member from certain matters, which I'll explain that at the time, and why I am resigning as the chair completely. The way I've got the agenda laid out now, it basically presumes that my resignation as chair would be effective upon adjournment of the meeting, which I had intended to give Raquel and Dennis and you and our other board members the opportunity to kind of circle back on your own and designate an acting chair, et cetera, after the meeting, after you've had a chance to kind of, get the debrief that I'm giving you folks. Obviously, at the end of the meeting, if rather than adjourning, you guys would like to carry on, and maybe if you have another member, you could do that. It will be entirely up to you at that point, as far as I'm concerned, but we can deal with that at the end. I did want to detain you, and I'm sorry to take everybody's time, but I did want to make sure that I addressed all of the kind of matters that I've been involved in that are important, and make sure that I don't inadvertently drop the ball for the community by not letting everybody know everything that I need to let them know. So the first thing that I wanted to start out with was an issue that arose, and I only become aware of over the last couple of weeks as the kind of national tragedy and response to that has been going on, just kind of coincidentally, out of the work that we've been talking about in historic preservation. I had actually done some investigating, and I want to share that with you folks and just kind of have it on the record here someplace to start with, which is, I had a limited understanding of the history of the Black community in New Paltz. I had understood that the original proprietors of New Paltz held slaves in the 16 and 1700s. I knew that from kind of, the limited amount of information about that you get at the top level at Huguenot Street. So I understood that there were Black people who were enslaved there. And I had seen the historical marker at the northern end of Huguenot Street, quite a ways outside of the kind of tourist, Huguenot Street experience, noting that there was a burial ground for slaves there before Black people were allowed to be buried in a segregated portion of the rural cemetery on Plains Road. That really was the limit of my understanding of the situation, which I have come to kind of be horrified with myself that was my understanding after 5 years of living here and purportedly caring about these issues. it was, though the discussions about historical preservation that were the subject that I raised at our last meeting, actually, though, that prompted me to investigate further, because I was sure that what I knew couldn't be it. And was there anything from our villages or towns' historical work? And at first, it didn't seem like there was anything there. But I did some independent research. I found out that at the time before emancipation in New York, 13% of our village, the residents, were enslaved Black people. I learned that although the numbers of Black people in New Paltz declined precipitously after New York emancipation and after the Civil War, there were still 100 or so Black New Paltzers after the Civil War in the 1870s or so. And this was still around 5 to 10% of the village's population. And I found these kind of remnants. There was a presentation at historic Huguenot Street, kind of a one-off a couple of years ago. I found some newspaper articles, and basically I pieced together this story, which was that after the Civil War, there was a very kind of tenacious local Black community here in New Paltz. These were descendants of the slaves of the proprietors, the original Duzine, along with refugees from southern states after the Civil War. And I learned that this community had neighborhoods here in New Paltz, that one of them was a neighborhood up around Mulberry Street and Chestnut, which was at the time an extremity of the town, that another was down by Pencil Hill Road. I learned that there was a veteran of the Union Army who was a Black New Paltzer, who after the war became a quite noted local builder, who built homes for both Black and white families in New Paltz. And I learned that, in fact, a dozen or so of his homes are still standing here in New Paltz. There's 2 or 3 of them on Mulberry Street. There's some on Church and on Broadhead. I also learned that same Black community that he was a part of and a leader in built their own church, the Zion AME Church on Pencil Hill Road, because of the segregation they still faced at the Dutch Reformed Church on Huguenot Street. And I learned that there was a neighborhood around that AME Church on Pencil Hill Road that was, besides the Mulberry Street neighborhood, the other Black neighborhood in town. I also learned that Jacob Wynkoop, this builder and Civil War veteran, in fact, named Mulberry Street. So I was a little bit disturbed. I was a lot disturbed to find out that I could find all of that out inside of a week, but that I'd never known that you would never know it by going to Huguenot Street. You would never know it by looking at these homes that still exist. And then I went to Pencil Hill, which I'll be honest with you, except to drive on it once before, I think I'd never been there. And this kind of struck a nerve for me and our work on the planning board, because one of the first things I did, I believe, as chair of the planning board, was approve our resolution or write our resolution, which we approved for the construction of a single family home at 6 Pencil Hill Road, which at the time I didn't think a thing of. I knew nothing about Pencil Hill Road. All I knew it was a vacant lot. I didn't think, oh boy, this was back right next to the railroad when the railroad was here, who lived here at some time. And I didn't think any of those things. But my investigations have led me to understand that the building that's now at 1 Pencil Hill Road is actually built on the foundations of the original Zion AME Church, that the house directly across the street, 4 Pencil Hill Road, is from 1877, almost certainly is a home that was built by Black parishioners of that church. And that 6 Pencil Hill Road is the vacant lot next to it. Now, I was pretty sure when I learned all of this and kind of horrified that we had approved this and that the house had been built, because if you go over there, there's this nice, big, nice, I guess is a subjective term. It's a large modern home next to the small 1877 house I'm talking about. And I thought that was the one we had approved, and that this lot, which I had come to learn was adjacent to a historic Black church from the 1800s, had been bulldozed. It hasn't been. It's still there. My understanding from Corey is that the building permit has been issued. And so I guess construction could start any time. So I kind of learned all of this and realized that none of the buildings I'm talking about, by the way, are protected in any way. The village has landmarked 11 buildings since 2000. None of them buildings known to have been or associated with any people of color or these are homes of wealthy upper middle class and wealthy white people are the landmark homes. So my concern is that just as our planning board basically did already authorize digging into and building on this vacant lot across from this 1870 Black church in town, that basically all of the remnants of this community that community hung on here through really bad times and a lot of racism until the 1920s, when finally they were driven away by all of the racism and the poverty, and people moved to Poughkeepsie or Newburgh or Kingston. And there was, from that time forward, basically no Black community in New Paltz anymore. And so I came to realize that we were in danger, very serious danger, of all of us participating in erasing that these people had been here, that they had lived this life and this struggle, and that they built these buildings for their families to live in. And we're living in them now with not a word about this community and what happened here. So I thought it was important, first and foremost, just to let everyone know that. I have examined, and it seems to me like there is no power of the planning board to undo our site plan approval for 6 Pencil Hill Road, or to direct the building inspector to do anything with respect to the process of constructing on that parcel. It's my understanding that the village board has to do something. If someone's going to do something, the village board has to come in and tell the building department to revoke the building permit or otherwise to temporarily classify the place as a landmark, et cetera. They need to do something that we can't do as a planning board, is my understanding. And so my intention had been, before I thought I was going to resign, to come to the planning board and try to rally the board for a recommendation to the village board that it immediately take action to preserve the empty lot, but also to preserve the known buildings, structures, pending kind of a thorough and proper landmarking procedure, hopefully, in my view, to designate these areas as historic districts with individual landmark properties and proper recognition by the village of these this remaining piece of Black history in New Paltz that has not yet been lost. I'm still planning on pushing for that when I'm not the chair anymore and I'm recused from some of this stuff on the planning board. I'm still that's going to be my volunteer work, is going to be trying to advance that cause. So you're not going to not hear from me on that. But I thought that the board should know that, and maybe the board and the board's attorney, after you guys have a chance to talk later on down the road, will come to different conclusions about whether anything can be done or whether something should be done. That won't be my place anymore. But I needed you to have that information. I have attached to the record here some of the photos of some of these homes. There's also a map from 1875 that pretty clearly shows these 2 Black neighborhoods. Just for some reference, and I'll be doing more work on that. So I expect to be forwarding more factual material about this to this board, the HPC, and to the village board in the future. But I wanted you to at least have what I had at this time after I realized this. So that is agenda item number 1, and to me, it's the most important agenda item, and that's really what I expected to be talking about here, because I think it's critical that we take action on that. In the process of thinking about taking action on that, it became clear to me that because of a bunch of the other items I'm going to go through, it would be difficult for me to continue, but I need to go through each of those for you. So we've gone through bullet point number 1 about Pencil Hill Road and landmarking historically Black New Paltz. So the next thing on this list for debriefing is the new proposed village law imposing historic preservation committee regulation on the entire village, which is the item that we talked about last time. Again, that was something that I intended for us to talk about further as a board, if I was involved, and again, hoped to recommend to the village board that they decline these amendments and pursue a different path. Now, since the first conversation that I had, just so folks are clear, I didn't know about any of this until I attended that village board meeting, I think on May 6th. So this is now, less than a month ago. Had no idea that the village board was doing this. No one came to me as the planning board chair and indicated that any of this was in the pipeline. If you'll recall, the most recent thing the planning board had referred to the village board was the proposed revisions of section 212.23, trying to streamline the building application process, which I'll get to right after this. But I hadn't heard about what had happened to that, and then didn't hear about this until I went to the meeting. And that meeting went as it did, and I reported out from there. And then we had our meeting. We heard from Tom Olson of HPC. And then I actually had a subsequent conversation with the mayor. And so I spoke to the mayor rather, at some length about this proposed change. And the nature of the conversation was me suggesting to the mayor that I didn't understand why he or the board were interested in pursuing this. I told him that I thought it was illegal, and that if he had gotten legal advice to the contrary, that I thought he was getting bad legal advice, but that I also just thought it was wrong to be imposing virtually a homeowners association on the village without people knowing it was coming. Having everyone wake up and find out that they needed to put in applications to the HPC to change, relatively minor things about the appearance of their home. I asked the mayor, I don't understand this, because Tom Olson, I believe at both meetings, the village board meeting and our meeting, emphasized that he believed that the right thing to do was to research and create historic districts, but that the mayor had insisted on doing it this way. So I asked the mayor about that, and I said, I don't get it. You seem to be, willing to subject the people of the village to the downsides of historic regulation. Everyone's gonna have to fill out applications and wait for approvals and so forth, but none of the upsides, none of the brown signs or the plaques or any of the other things you get out of having your neighborhood or your house actually made a landmark. And I said, I also, it just seems like it would be easy. And I went through, this was before, by the way, I had discovered about the historic Black neighborhood. So in my ignorance, there I am saying, oh, well, you could easily designate the north side of Main Street as this kind of historic district, and the side by the college is this kind of historic district, and down by the waterfront, which includes the Pencil Hill area, this kind of neighborhood, without even thinking about historic Black neighborhoods. And I said to him, look, the only places I can think of where you couldn't just right away seemingly have like a pretty ready-made historic district are the apartment complexes, which who cares about having a historic there? And I said, the Bonnecue View neighborhood, which is the Bonnecue View, and then the extension with Cooper Street and Pine Street, the modern net zero homes that are over there. So I said to him, that's the only thing I can think of that really wouldn't just be easily slottable into a historic district is Bonnecue View. And in response to that, the mayor said to me, well, John, that's just it. That's why it has to be the entire village. Because you see, my ex-wife lives in the Bonnecue View neighborhood, and her neighbor wants to do this crazy thing with their driveway. And I need a way to do something about that. So I did not respond to the mayor's statement. I did not tell him at the time that I thought it was inappropriate. I did steer the conversation at that point away from further discussion of any personal connection between the mayor's personal circumstances and why we were talking about amending the law. And I recommended to him strongly again that he consult with the village's attorneys about all of this. Now, at the village board meeting itself, and in after the HPC meeting, Tim had told me that we were all going to be talking with the village's mayor. That up to this point has not happened. I've not heard from Tim or anybody else about talking to the village attorney about any of the issues that were raised about this proposed amendment to the village code. So that's where that discussion, as far as I know, got left, and I've not spoken about that with the mayor since then. So moving on to the next one, which is the Village Code 21223. So if folks don't remember, this is a series of revisions to the Village Code that was intended to make it easier for applicants and their contractors who wanted to do work here in the village to not necessarily always need to go through a full site plan review or, and to be able to have things kind of approved more easily by the buildings department, to have fees not always automatically collected at the highest levels, just to make things cheaper and faster for applicants, and hopefully.
Is this what we started with Eve?
Yes.
Okay.
So we finished all that work with Eve, and then we formally recommended those changes to the village board, and that was last year. And according to my review of the village board's minutes, the village board heard Eve present on it and then has repeatedly postponed any further discussion every time it's come up on their agenda. And then most recently, it simply disappeared from the village board's agenda. So what basically replaced 21223 in the village board's agenda was this HPC, let's designate the whole village kind of thing. And so as far as I know, there's been no substantive discussion of, what are the kind of changes or what's the pushback to the planning board. It's basically just gone into a drawer. Now, I was on a series of email correspondence, and I have attached one of those to the record here. And there was an unrelated conversation about another matter that ended with the former planning board chair, Eve Walter, who is now an Ulster County legislator, asking our deputy mayor, KT, for an update on the progress of 21223. And KT responded to Eve by saying that the village board has not been able to do anything except for COVID-related actions for the last several months. And Eve wrote back to KT, and the exchange is in there, is seemingly not convinced that that was the case. The concerning thing here to me is that I know that's not the case. And in fact, you can go and watch the village board meetings or read the minutes. They're doing things like this HPC approval process, or considering the boutique hotel use tables, or there's a number of other things that the village board has been doing, not just generally non-COVID related, but planning related, not COVID related. And so I just felt it important to note that for the board, because it seemed that it would be appropriate to give our legislators a honest view of what's happening at the village board level. So that's 21223. Moving on to the next item is the lawsuit that we have apparently against Richard Steffens, who is a former member of this board. And the lawsuit relates to his actions while he was on this board, and really have implications, as far as I can see, for everyone on this board and for the village. I did not know anything about this lawsuit until the very last village board meeting that happened last week. It was not on the agenda. The mayor mentioned it as part of an announcement, saying that negotiations to settle this dispute between the village and Mr. Steffens had broken down, and that Mr. Steffens had rejected the $2,000 settlement offer the village had made, where Mr. Steffens would pay $2,000, and that the lawsuit would be proceeding. Now, I never heard of this, and I simply asked the question during the meeting, what does Mr. Steffens say is the reason he doesn't owe the fee? This lawsuit purportedly is over Mr. Steffens owing $7,500 for a recreation fee for a site plan and subdivision approval from our board. And the mayor did not respond to me during the public meeting. Instead, he said he would send the publicly filed complaint, and he did. He sent a unsigned copy of the publicly filed complaint, which I reviewed during the meeting while it was still going on, the village board meeting. I immediately wrote to the rest of the village board after seeing this, telling them that I thought that this was a mistake, that they had gotten bad advice, that they were going to lose this and cost the village a bunch of money. I got a phone call from the mayor after that to discuss my views of this lawsuit. Now, just so you understand, the premise of this lawsuit is that Mr. Steffens, when he was on the village board, had an application before our board. I think the number's in the agenda. And he recused himself, and there's no dispute that he recused himself from this application on the property that he was associated with. And it was approved. And there is also no dispute that the planning board at the time did not make any finding that the village had a need for open space, et cetera, et cetera. There is nothing in the record showing that the village board, that the planning board made a finding that this parcel was not appropriate for reserving open space, and so there should be a fee, any of that. None of that was done, and that's undisputed. And instead, the village has apparently sued Mr. Steffens on the theory that even though the government didn't do what it was supposed to do to make someone owe a fee, that Mr. Steffens should have known that he owed the fee, or that he orally promised the mayor subsequently that he would pay the fee, or that because he was on the planning board and had a fiduciary relationship with the village, he's responsible for knowing what all the fees are and for paying them, even if the village doesn't go through the steps to make someone pay a fee. Now, this is ludicrous. This is all ludicrous. And I expressed that to the mayor. The mayor had only sent me the complaint at the time. He had not sent me Mr. Steffens. I don't know Mr. Steffens, by the way, at all. I've never met him. I know nothing about him, other than what's in these law documents and what the planning board minutes I've seen. So the mayor put in the complaint under oath, and Mr. Steffens answered it under oath. One of the things that the mayor alleged under oath in the complaint was that the reason this was all done this way, the reason why there was after the fact oral promises to pay a village fee was because the planning board chair who was handling the application had died during the process. As Mr. Steffens points out in his verified answer under oath, the chair was very much alive and in fact commented on the record in the minutes during the approval process. Notwithstanding the fact that the village is out there claiming under oath that this man was dead, and that was the reason why we didn't have a formal process to collect this fee. Anyway, I explained to the mayor my view that, again, he was getting very bad advice and should not proceed with this lawsuit because it was going to lose money. And because it had exposed the planning board and the village board, all of us, everyone who's on the planning board and everyone who's on the village board, to the possibility of civil discovery in this case, because according to the village in this lawsuit, it's not about some fee that someone was properly given all the paperwork for and they didn't pay. It's about oral promises and discussions after the fact. And so that means that all of our conversations, anyone who said anything that could relate to Rich Steffens or to the payment of recreation fees would be fair game for Mr. Steffens' lawyers to be asking us all to image our hard drives and produce all of this over this fee. It also, to me, sends a horrible message to members of the planning board to tell them that they know all of the fees. I don't know if Dennis or Raquel, if you guys really feel like you know all of the fees that are on our fee table, but under the village's current theory, we all know all of that, and if we don't pay it on something that we build, it doesn't matter if the planning board didn't ask us for the money or go through the process to get the money, we still owe the money because we're supposed to know the fees. It's also a terrible message to send to, it's not always appropriate to have a developer on or a real estate person on a village board or a planning board, but it's not a bad thing. It's sometimes a good thing, but it's going to send a very bad message if, this is the way that we handle people paying fees on the planning board. I mean, there's a real problem with the idea that the government's going to come after you years after you put in an application for something, and the government didn't do what it was supposed to do to make you pay the fee, but they're still going to come after you. So that means that all the applicants before now your board, who you do a resolution saying you're approving the application and that they get it if they pay these fees, they can rightly say, well, wait a second, how do I know that I'm okay just because you passed this resolution? Because the village sues people even if they do what's in the resolution. So I raised all of this with Tim. And the mayor said to me that he didn't care, that Rich Steffens was a scumbag real estate developer and that he wasn't going to take this. Again, I've never met Mr. Steffens. I know he was a member of this board. I think he was a member of the school board. I had no idea why the mayor was telling me that Mr. Steffens was a scumbag. I had not heard anything that would suggest there was anything wrong with his character other than Tim saying that Mr. Steffens should have known he owed this money, even if the village made a mistake. I told the mayor that lawsuits are not things you do on principle. They're things you do if you can win. And he asked me if I knew that he had spent $2,000 of his own money to fight the certificate of occupancy for 2 Mohawk Avenue. And I told him I didn't know that. And he explained that he did and explained the problems with that building, which I didn't really understand. I said to him, okay, well, if you want to do that with your own money, I guess, I can't stop you, but I still don't think it's appropriate for you to spend the village's money on a lawsuit that can't win just to teach someone a lesson. The phone call ended with the mayor disagreeing with me and telling me basically that everything else aside, he could not let this go, and he was not going to basically, in his view, let Mr. Steffens win by walking away from the lawsuit. So that's the lawsuit. No, one other thing about that is I did check. My understanding is that, the village board has to pass a resolution in order for the village to sue someone for a code violation. For the life of me, I can't find this lawsuit ever being even discussed by the village board. I can't find any resolution authorizing this lawsuit. So I leave that to you folks and wiser heads, but I thought it was important that people know that this lawsuit seems to have come out of nowhere, but maybe I've got that wrong. So that's the lawsuit. Then there's the second to last here, third to last, sorry, is the burial ground. So this came up when I was researching the historical Black neighborhoods of New Paltz. I had known that in 2017, the village had been given a gift of a cemetery and a meadow on Huguenot Street. I had been out there before, and I went out there again to look more carefully. I had assumed that we were paying to maintain this land and this cemetery. And I thought, I had an issue with that and a concern I wanted to raise because, and you can see in the photos that I've submitted on this point, the slave burial ground is down the street in a fairly disrespectful location that says, move along, don't stay here. And these are obviously, there's a marker on the side of the road denoting that there are unmarked graves somewhere around of these enslaved Black people. The cemetery that the village got as a gift is a cemetery, a family cemetery of the white families who owned those slaves. And so I already kind of had a social justice issue and kind of had pointed out to the mayor my concern with just the social justice of carefully tending to an immaculate cemetery for the white families and doing nothing with that property to even let people know that further down the road was a slave burial ground. And then I went to the cemetery and I found out from the sign that's on the gate there that it's actually still an active cemetery and that the village is responsible for arranging burials in that cemetery. But it says on the sign that burials are limited to the white proprietor families only. And so basically, in effect, the village is operating a segregated cemetery on Huguenot Street for the white families that held slaves here. Now, there could be lots of, I guess, good reasons why one would make arrangements to take over private cemeteries and do this kind of a thing, but it seems like this was not carefully thought about. And I did raise this, and the mayor actually made some statements online that the village board had been advised that they had to do this, that they had to take over the cemetery. And that's simply wrong. And I explained that to the mayor at the time, and I haven't heard anything different, that in fact, neither the town nor the village was under any legal obligation to take over this private family cemetery. And even if we were going to take it over to maintain it, that we were under no obligation to continue to operate it for additional segregated burials. I haven't heard anything on that. I raised that here because I think it is an important issue for this board and for the village board to address, is how that happened, why the village believed it had to do that as opposed to had options, and whether or not it is appropriate, not necessarily to end that relationship. There may be no way around it. It may be legally binding on the village now, having accepted the gift and made terms. There may be no way around it. But is there not some way to promote healing and restorative justice by using maybe some portion of that large, beautiful meadow that is attached to the gorgeous cemetery to provide some recognition and space, which is sorely lacking, in my view, on Huguenot Street for some recognition of Black history in New Paltz. So that's the cemetery issue. The last two issues are, I guess, less kind of controversial. I just want to update the board on the lack of updates, I guess. I have not heard more, despite I was told that we would again be having conversations with the town lawyer, the village lawyer, about the boutique hotel use designation, possibly in the B1 and NBR districts. I've heard nothing additional on that. I do expect, though, that if there's no further applications, that may be the thing that the planning board actually has to do next, in terms of has to do, because if the village board does propose to pass this change in the use table for B1 and NBR, they are going to be required to ask the planning board for an advisory memo, and the planning board's going to be required to produce it in 45 days, which is what we talked about before. So that still seems to be kind of the next live possible project if the village board goes ahead with that. I have no information, though, about whether they are or not. And then the last item on here is about the Lalo group and the concept proposal we had seen for the pit project. And I just wanted to let folks know that I'd had extensive conversations with the mayor about the pit project and about the Lalo group, and the mayor and I very much agreed on a series of concerns about the proposed concept and its lack of integration into kind of the ideals of current New Paltz development thinking. And there's no further action on that as far as I know. The mayor did ask me to help contribute some draft language for a request for proposal, possibly for a redevelopment concept that might include the adjacent village-owned parcels and or in combination with that pit parcel, and see whether or not there is a taste for private-public partnership in development there, which, the current owner, the Lalo Group, would be obviously able to apply in such a process like anybody else. I did want to disclose to this board conversations I had had with the mayor about Lalo Group and its principles, though, because it seems like people are not aware that the Lalo Group's principal was the owner of a business operated by his brother that was convicted of multiple felonies for stealing wages from workers. They stole $800,000 from not many workers. And they've been ordered to pay restitution. Now, that's not the Lalo Group, that's the Lalo Drywall. But the principal of Lalo Group has now also been sued for stealing wages by another set of complaining former workers in federal court in I believe in the Eastern District of Brooklyn. And so I just want the board to be aware of the risk warning that I discussed with the mayor, which is my concern that if in fact the Lalo Group and its principals are in need of money, getting an approval for a site plan from the village would then allow potentially the group, the developer, to get a construction loan. And that, given the background of the applicant, it's possible in such cases that there's a risk that the purpose of this is just to get the construction loan and to make use of those proceeds, not for building something there, but for their own ends, and that the village could end up with a partly started construction project down in the pit, because the operators, the developers are not able or don't even intend to develop the site. And I caution the mayor, and I'm going to caution the board here, that I think it's very important that the credentials, the reputation, and the ability of any applicant who's going to be taking on a project of that size really needs to be carefully examined and thought about before approvals are handed out, because I've seen plenty of development projects that end with a couple of concrete pads and some rebar sticking everywhere and nothing else. So that's my debrief to the board on kind of everything I know, everything I've been part of up to this point. So I don't have really a choice at this point but to recuse myself as a member of the board from participating in any discussions really or votes on any of the kind of stuff that I've just raised. Any of these policies, any of the code revisions, any of that stuff, I can't really participate in, because the fact is that as you hear, as a citizen, as a member of the planning board, I believe that there's serious problems with the way the village government is being run. I will tell you now, I work for the Attorney General's office. That has nothing to do with my job here. I know of no involvement between the Attorney General's office and anything having to do with the village of New Paltz. And because of the rules of my participation here, I would never know if the office was doing anything, wasn't doing anything. I would never know about it. At the same time, I'm required by the rules to avoid the appearance of impropriety. And I believe that if I continue as a member making votes or making arguments on these subjects, that it will become very difficult, if not impossible, for the public, for members of the boards, et cetera, to separate my opinions as a member of the board from the Attorney General's office, one of whose jobs is to police misconduct in local government. So I can't risk creating any kind of appearance of a conflict of interest or confusing the public or any members of the boards as to the Attorney General's office somehow being involved here when it is not, at least not through me. So I'm going to be recusing myself from anything, beyond basically our usual application business going forward. And I think that's required of me under the rules of my appointment here. It may well be, I want to warn everyone, it may well be that my office decides that's not good enough and they want me to resign completely. The village board could ask me to resign, which if the village board wants to ask me to resign, I would resign. If this board asks me to resign my membership, I would resign my membership. I simply am not resigning my membership because I don't think that's appropriate. I believe the mayor would name my replacement.
I'm sorry, John, can you, can you clarify then what, because you're not resigning as a member, but you were resigning.
I'm resigning as the chair.
As the
I
chair,
can't be
okay.
the chair at all.
Okay.
And so I'm not recusing myself as the chair from this or that. I can't be the chair, and I'll get into that. So one of the reasons I can't be the chair is because of the recusal, because even if I was going to, as a member, I think I can just do site plan approvals, for example. But if I'm the chair, I'm supposed to be setting the agenda and things like that. And if I can't participate in code revisions, how can I know where to?
No, I understand. I just want to make sure. I
Right.
understand.
So I can't be the chair for that reason. And I've also come to understand that the chair really is supposed to serve at the pleasure of the mayor. And I feel fairly confident that the mayor is not pleased with my service and will not be pleased with my service. And I don't think it's appropriate in that kind of a position. The planning board membership is appointed, and then you're supposed to be independent of the elected officials. My understanding of the chair is different. The chair is at the pleasure of the elected officials. And if that's the case, and that's my understanding, I don't think it's fair to the mayor to put him in a position of asking, when to ask me to stop being the chair. I'll stop being the chair now because I'm just not going to participate in those discussions at all going forward from any position on this board or any other. And I'll just, kind of speak as a private citizen on all of those matters going forward. So that was, kind of where I came out on all of this. And it's too bad. I don't think there's a reason not to put people from the AG's office on boards. I'd not anticipated that issues like this would arise. But I think given the nature of my office and given the nature of my concerns, it would be a big mistake for me to continue making decisions as the chair, setting agendas, trying to rally the board to the kinds of recommendations to the village board that I had referenced earlier, because I just think it's too dangerous and improper. So I'm not going to do that. That's all I really have. I did not do what I'd said at the beginning, which is the one vote that I think we can take and should, because the three of us are here, is to approve our minutes from our meeting of May 19th, 2020. So I will move that we approve the minutes of our May 19th, 2020 meeting.
So motion.
Can I have a second? Well, I motioned it.
Sorry, second.
Okay, and I vote aye. And Raquel, how do you vote?
Aye.
And Dennis, you still there?
It looks like he's there, but he's muted.
Okay, well, we're going to need, it'd be good to get his vote, because that's the only thing we have to vote on, I think. In the meantime, I'll ask, do we have any liaison board reports for the board for the last time for me? Don here, Bill here?
Working
Hey,
on it.
John.
Working on it.
Don, you go ahead.
I've got nothing to report. I know we're looking to the pit project with interest, but since it's not been proposed, we've nothing really to add to the meeting right now.
Okay.
And no updates from me, John. Thanks.
Okay.
Now,
So-
John, can I ask?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't know if that
Please,
was
I'm
the
sorry, I
time.
talked all that time.
Yeah,
and
I'm
done,
honestly
basically.
impressed. I was like, you
I'm
must be
done, so I'll
thirsty.
throw it open to you guys, to you and to Dennis. If you have questions, if Rick, I think you guys are gonna need to
Yeah.
talk to Rick separately from me now.
Yeah,
My thought had been when we adjourn that my resignation would be effective as chair
okay.
upon the adjournment of the meeting. But I want you guys tell me, ask me questions, tell me what you want to do, however I can facilitate and deal with this situation.
I guess it might be best just to adjourn and go from there. Obviously, I just
Yeah.
want to say thank you so much, because it seems like you did a lot of work to present the information that you presented this evening. And it's a lot to absorb, and I'm grateful that we've recorded this, because I feel like I'm going to need to rewatch this a few
Right.
times just to really process everything that was brought up tonight. So Rick, under your advice, maybe it's best we adjourn, and then we can talk about procedural steps next. But thank you.
That's fine,
Thank you.
whatever the pleasure is.
Yeah.
We can, and if the board wants to, as you know, you don't only receive legal advice at a meeting. You can
Okay.
receive legal advice at any time. So if if the board wants to go ahead, and I can set up a WebEx meeting or a Zoom meeting in which we can talk in an attorney-client, and you can frankly ask any questions you have, and I'll be able to answer.
Okay, thank you.
Still no word from Dennis?
No, nothing from
Okay,
Dennis.
we're
I
gonna
mean,
lose our
you-
ability both to approve the minutes and to adjourn, which
Yeah, I mean, we don't need to approve the minutes. That's like,
No, that's true because there will be three besides me around who were there. So that's the only thing I was worried about is that, yeah, we had more than three last time. For sure, didn't we?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
Noel was there. And
Well, if you're
Okay.
continuing as a member, you'll be able to vote on minutes.
Oh, that's right. That's
At the
right. I
next
will.
meeting.
You're right.
Hey, can
You're
you
right.
guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Yeah,
Now
there
we
he is.
can.
Hey, Dennis.
Yeah. Well, listen, this is, first of all, I guess I'm going to say, as usual, I'd really rely on Rick. This is quite a shock. I appreciate everything you did, John. In fact, the last meeting, I was very impressed. But quite frankly, as a board member and as a resident, I think we really have to regroup here. And the one guy that I would lean on would be Rick. So whatever Rick might want to put together, I think is important, very, very important. Because first of all,
I'm not sure what everybody's questions would be. So I think it's best if we have an attorney-client meeting and everybody can
agree.
kind of regroup and figure out
Yep.
some questions you have. And then we can have a meeting to discuss and I'll answer your questions.
now,
All right,
what
so-
should we be putting a plan together, Rick? Because right now it almost seems like the planning board is, in a state of dissolving. We don't have, like when I first started, we had a real solid group of knowledgeable people. We've had quite a bit of turnover in the last 2.5, 3 years that I'm here. Not that the people we have now aren't very good, but I think we really should take a look at, first of all, who's going to be the chair. Second of all, some of these issues that John has raised, how are we going to address these? And then, after all of this COVID-19 is over with, you got to start getting applications and things can really get busy. So again, I heard what you said about the client meetings, but I think we really have to rely on you to put things back in order.
That's fine. And let me just say a few things with respect to that. First of all, if there happens to be a meeting in which there's no chairman, then the remainder of the planning board decides who the chairman is going to be for that meeting. But the power of appointment of a chairman is solely the mayor, subject to the approval of the Board of Trustees. So at the end of this meeting, there'll be a vacancy in the chairman position. And I will notify Will Frank. And so Will can discuss with Tim and Tim with the board as to who they want to appoint as chairperson. I don't think, Dennis, that the board is on the brink of dissolving. These things happen. I've been doing this for 30 years, and these things happen from time to time where boards have a lot of new members or newish members, and they get together and they coalesce and they move forward. So you lose some historical information when longtime members leave, but new historical experience gets built up over time. So that I think it's fine. I think that probably before the next meeting that there will be a chairman or chairperson rather appointed by the mayor. But if not, then the planning board would appoint one for that particular meeting and wait until a chairperson is formally appointed. There are some of the things that John raised are clearly planning board related matters. Others, in my opinion, are clearly not planning board related matters where they don't have jurisdiction to act upon such things. We can talk about those. I was prepared tonight to talk about the HPC because John had asked me to go ahead and research several issues with respect to that. I've done that. But if it's decided that should wait until a future time, then it can wait until a future time.
Yeah, I apologize to everybody. I wish it were not the case. I don't see that I have a choice here that does not just progressively, that if I don't do this now, I just risk progressively making the risk worse for everyone, for myself, the Attorney General's office, the board, the village. And so I'm very sorry for the disruption of me needing to step back and not be the chair anymore, and not be able to participate in these kinds of decisions. But this is not a discretionary thing. I really, feel like I don't have a choice here. Sorry.
That's understood. Now, should you motion to adjourn? I'm not sure.
I can because, well, I mean, I said that I was going to. I don't think there's any. This is
No,
not like an employment situation, so I don't think you have to accept my resignation. I'm resigning.
All right.
So I guess
Before we
I'm
make,
happy.
before we make the motion to adjourn,
Mhm.
what I will do, because I sort of get the feel that this is desired, I will send out an email and actually what I'll do is I'll be asking Alana to go ahead and help me schedule a time when everybody is available for an attorney-client meeting, and we can go over whatever questions anybody has with respect to what has been raised tonight or anything else.
Thank you. We appreciate that a lot.
Okay, thanks a lot, Rick. And John, thanks a lot for your
Yes, thank you, John.
support.
And Dennis and Raquel, it's been my pleasure and my privilege, and I wish and I hope I can work with you guys again in the future. If I ever move on career-wise from the Attorney General's office, I won't have to deal with these kinds of things. If I'm welcome again on a board, I'll be happy to join and work on that, or work with you guys outside of boards, just help the community. So thanks so much for all of the camaraderie and support. It's been wonderful working with you guys and with you too, Rick. Thank you.
Thanks. Good luck.
Okay, I'm going to move to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All right, I vote aye. Raquel?
Aye.
Dennis?
Aye.
We're adjourned.
All
Thank you
right.
so much,
Thank you
guys.
so much. Have a wonderful night.
All right, you
Good
too.
night, everyone.
Bye.